Okay. We are up to Daf Yud Beis Amar Aleph. Rami Bachama asked the question, and we explained that the question is basically when you make a neder, is it a mikora katafis or b'dahashta katafis? Basically, when you make a neder, and something right now that originally was part of a neder, but now, for example, it's mutter. You're comparing the bread on the table. We gave an example. You're comparing the bread on the table to a carbon shlamim, and happens to be the carbon shlamim sitting on the table right now was afterwards sprinkled when you're permitted to eat. So if we're comparing it to right now, then there's no problem, no issue. If you're comparing it to the way the shlam originally was, it was something that you made a neder, it was forbidden until you sprinkle the blood. Now we know what your intent is because we have a rule: "Ein adam meitzid b'ol batali." You don't understand say words on for naught. So obviously you want to make a neder, you want this bread to be us, but it's not good enough to intent if the words themselves contradict what you're saying. So now we're basically judging the words. When you say zu kazu, are you saying it the way it is currently? So therefore, it doesn't matter if you want to make the bread also, but you can't because the words you said was you're comparing the bread to a piece of meat that's mutter to eat right now. Or do we say, no, you're looking at that meat. Now it's mutter, but originally it was something that you made a neder on. So therefore, that the words themselves lend itself to that, and therefore it's a valid neder. So we try to bring two different proofs, one from the Mishnah about Noiser, and so on. And then we said, no, it's talking about Noiser and Oiler, so it never became permitted. No difference if it's comparing it to now or yesterday. And then we talked about somebody who makes a declaration to fast on the day of the yard site. And then a number of years later, he goes ahead and he says, I want it to be like the day of the yard site. And even though in the intervening years, there were a number of Sundays, there's Chodesh Nisan that you didn't fast, and yet we're saying that it's a valid neder because we go back to the beginning. And we answered, no, could very well be that every single year you've been fasting on the yard site. So you don't have to go back to the beginning. You go back to the last year's Sunday. No, is it the prevalent, the current one, and that you fasted as well. So it's a valid neder. So we're stuck. We don't have a resolution to Rami Bacham. And then we'll see then the Gemara, as most questions we had in Gemara Nedarim, we don't resolve them. So let's continue. Toshma, it says in the Braisa, what happens if somebody says, it says, remember what? If somebody says, Kachalas, Aaron Uketrumasa. I'm making a neder that the bread I have in front of me should be treated like the challah of Aaron or like Truma. The challah of Aaron is, when you make challah, you have to, when you make challah b'Shabbos, whatever it is, bread, you have to take off a piece and give it to the kohen, or Truma that you give to the kohen. Now, they are not considered davar hanodar because you have to set it aside and give it to them. And some of the Shem explain why it's not davar nodar is because since it's permitted to the kohenim and forbidden to everybody else, that's not something that's in my control. That's more like a halacha, like an iser, and therefore it's considered davar asa. So you make a neder and comparing it to something which is asa, it's not a valid neder. So the din is mutter. Then the bread that you have in front of you is still mutter because you did not make a proper neder. What happens if you would have said, "Ha ketrumas lachmei toida"? If you would have said, "I'm comparing the bread on my table to the 40 now by a carbon toida Thanksgiving offering," we put aside 4 different esronim, measures of dough, and we turn each one into 10 chalas. So one of them is chametz. So you have 10 loaves of bread of chametz, and you have 3 different kinds of matzah. Whether one is when you have no oil inside, but you smear oil on top of it. One is you you mix the oil into the dough, you make the matzahs out of that, and the other one is you put a lot of oil into the dough. So 3 different kinds, and deep fried, shallow fried. You make 3 different kinds. And matzahs. And that's what you do. And from those 10 loaves, there's 4 sets of 10 loaves. From each set of 10 loaves, you give 1 challah to the kohen. So you're saying so because it's part of a carbon, so it's part of a neder, and then I'm comparing my bread on the table to the lachmei toida, the truma that I'm giving to the kohen, then that is asa. That is asa. And why? Because that's called a davar hanodur. Says the Gemara, and I'll make a question. Generally, when did they actually do this? When did they go ahead and give the lachmei toida and give part of it, one of the loaves of each one to a kohen? When did they do that? Because you're not allowed to eat it until after you sprinkle the blood. So you didn't bother doing it before you sprayed the blood. You did it, even though halachically you could, theory you could, but you didn't do it until after you sprinkle the blood. So l'chayda, after the sprinkle of blood, and right now everything is mutter, and you're saying the bread on my table should be like the lachmei toida. So what you mean? You mean basically the whole carbon, because the whole carbon is a davar another, and it's now, if you look at it currently, you're allowed to eat that carbon. So what are you answering? Obviously, you're going back to the beginning because it was a carbon. So we see clearly from here, be kara katafis. That's the most question. Says the Gemara, no, who said, you made his deduction. It doesn't say Ketrumas lachme tedasa. You made a deduction only Ketrumasai, the truma of Aaron Cohen, and therefore you said, why does stress truma? Just say Ketruma. By saying Ketrumasai is as if to say certain trumas are forbidden, and certain trumas is not called a davar asa, but a certain davar another. And we assume they're talking about chalas taida. So the Gemara said, no. It's chalos taida. You're right. It's totally mutter. That's not what the Bryce is coming to exclude. The Bryce is coming to exclude trumas halishcha. That trumas halishcha there, the neder will be also. That's what you say. The machzas hashekel you donate to the chamber in the base of Mikdash, and then they would take out of there, the three boxes. And that over there, if you said that it should be like the machzas hashekel, it's also because that is dover hanoder. Says the Gemara. So what are you telling me? So you want to argue that since we don't go after the beginning, we go after the current state. And if I'm going to compare it to lachmei toida, which is done after the sprinkling the current state, that lachmei toida is actually would be permitted. The bread that I have on my table would be permitted because I'm comparing it to a carbon, which if you look at it the way it's currently, and currently everything there is permitted. So avotum lachmei toida my mutter. So why does it say? Why does the Mishnah say listen? Why doesn't it say lachmei toida? Let's say that if you compare it not to trumasai, take a bigger chiddush. Even if you compare it to lachmei toida, which started out as a davar hanoder, and the choshke trumasai, now it's say madach lachmei toida that started as davar hanoder. We say we look at it currently, and since right now it's mutter, the neder therefore is not a neder. So surely, if you go after the truma of iron, which is a davar aser, surely it's not a neder. So more answers. How kamashlam that trumas lachmei toida trumasahi? No, you're wrong. You think that that truma lachmei toida wasn't included. When it said trumasai, the word trumasai included not only the truma that you give a 40 or 50 or 60 from your crop, but the trumasai also includes the challah of the carbon toida. That's included in trumasai, and the only thing it excludes is trumas halishcha. So there's no proof one way or another. It could be that trumas, that maybe when it says trumas, it includes the truma of a chalav of taita. That's not an neder. And why not? Because currently the animal is permitted. Number one. Or e-boys, I give you another answer. Trumas lachmei taita. You're right. That generally speaking, they didn't really do it until after the sprinkling of the blood, giving it to the kohen. But in theory, they could have done it before. So maybe since in theory it could have done it before, and if it's before the sprinkling of the blood, at that stage it's still forbidden. So it's a davar hanoda that is now forbidden. The chal on my table, if I compare it to the chalas taida at that stage, it would be a proper neder. So because sometimes it's a proper neder, sometimes it isn't. The Bryce doesn't want to talk about it. So you both say matrumas lachmet taida namikaydis ikadamu. You can also do it prior to the spraying of the blood. Keep going. For example, how the afrishin belisha. You set aside the bit that you're going to give to the kohen before you bake the chalas. You set it aside while it was still dough. And you took off a little piece of dough from each set. There's 4 sets. You took a little piece of dough from each set, and you set it aside for the kohen. So therefore, it's possible that it happened before the zika, and then the animal is still forbidden. And when I compare the bread on my table to the bread of everything's forbidden because it didn't spray the blood yet. So it's all good. So therefore, it doesn't prove that even if in current state it would be us. Says the Gemara, how do I know that's possible? Because like Tuvi Bar Kisna said name was Shmuel, lachmei toida, the bread of a toida, she'afon ba'ar bechalas, the bread of a toida, that let's say instead of making 40 chalas, 10 of each kind, you only made 1 large challah of each kind. 1 large challah, 1 large, 3 large matzahs, different kinds, instead of breaking it up into 10. But the Evid Baba Yotze. I Voksiv, it says clearly in the Pasuk Arboim, it says in the Pasuk it should be for 40 chalos. So we'll say the mitzvah, that's saying the Chatchila or ideally that should be. B'haboy the Mishkal Truma, how can you make 1 chal, let's say one chametz, but you have to give part of that, 1/10 of that, to the kohen. How do you do that? Now what's the problem? Break a piece of the chal, you have 1 large, like a chas in the chal, you have 1 large one there, take a piece and give it a coin. But you can't do that. The chitain with the shakal chadarip takula, you'll take 1 bread on all of it nan, Echad mikol korban. So first of all, we thought maybe just give one of the loaves to the kohen, and the other three are all right. You can't, because we learned echad mikol korban. Each one of these breads need to have their own challah that you have to give to the kohen. You can't take from one kind to another. What's the big deal? So you have 4 giant loaves, 3 of them are matzahs, and one of them is chametz, and give break each one a piece and give it to the kohen. You can't do either. But now we learned echad shelo yitul prusa. You're not allowed to. It says echad to tell you can't give a piece. You have to give entire challah to the kohen. So how can you make a large, one large challah of chametz, and how can you give that to the kohen? So Kamar Tubin says must be. You have no choice but to say el dafreshinu belisha. You set aside the piece of challah before you baked it. You took a piece of dough off and you set it aside to give it to the kohen from each one of the 4, and you did it before you baked it, and therefore it's possible before even sprinkling the blood, you already had the challah for the kohen. So therefore, when you're saying that my bread should be like the chalas, the trumas challah, I'm giving it to the kohen, it could very well be it happened before the sprinkling of the blood. The shakel chodem mechametz v'chodem min chalas v'chodem min kikim v'chodem min avucha. You take a piece of the dough from each one of these are the 4 kinds of matzahs and bread that you have to set aside. So therefore, it's possible that currently, right now, it is a davar nodin also taking place before the sprinkling of the blood. So this again proves nothing. Says okay, at the end of the day, lema, let us say this very question that we have, whether you look at it the way it's now or its original state, is actually a machlekes tanoim. What's the story there? It says harei alai kibchoy. If, for example, you said, I want that this piece of meat here should be treated like a bchor, the firstborn animal of a sheep, you have to give to a it's a bchor, and it's considered kodesh. You have to bring as a carbon, unless it has a mum. You give it to a kohen, and the kohen brings as a carbon, unless it has a mum. So let us say there's an interesting argument. What happens? I say that this piece of meat should be like a bchor. Rabbi Yaakov says it's forbidden, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's mutter. Now, what's going on here? What's the argument here? Why does one of them say it's permitted and one say it's forbidden? So if we're talking about, you said clearly, I want it to be like a bchor before you spray the blood, that when it's then my time of the man is shadi. Then why is it then it's a davar hanoder, then it's like it's right now it's a davar hanoder, it's a regular carbon, and that's the whole that's a paradigm of a neder. So you take a piece of meat, you say it should be like a carbon. That is what a neder is. So why should anyone hold that it's not a valid neder, it's mutter? Unless you're saying that what? I want it to be like bchor after spraying the blood when a kohen is allowed to eat it and everything's permitted, then everything is permitted. So what's the issue? My time of demand also. Why would anybody hold also? Elolav must be talking about the mochis basa bchor, must be talking about in front of you is lying a piece of the bchor, kameh, in front of him. Mochis basa the hey, you have another piece of meat, stam, in front of you. And then the you said zeh kazeh. Exactly the same question on Muhammad. That's what we're talking about. You have a piece of bchor over here lying in front of you that's permitted right now, but all you said was zeh kazeh. And we know that you're trying to make it usher. So we say the word zeh kazeh, you're looking at the current state, it's mutter, so it's not a neder. You're looking at the original state when it was a carbon, it's usher then, and if it's a valid neder. Isn't that exactly the argument? But Tanai saying, no, you're confused. It has nothing to do with Rambam's case. You know what they're talking about here? How do we view a bchor? Is a bchor a davar hanoder or is bchor davar asr? Bchor is something that's natural, so the firstborn. So is that considered a davar ha'asr? Because you didn't actually make it a bchor, it's automatic. So, and the Torah says that the firstborn is a bchor. So therefore, the pater echem, therefore that's a bchor. Or because I have to say that it is kodesh as kiyakdish, so maybe that's considered like a davar hanoder. That's the argument. Kol yamei Torah said between my leaf is dummy. Or my time with the mandashoy, what is permitted on Makarok? The pasuk says, when is it that we make a neder and you compare, let's say, an ordinary piece of meat to something else, and you want to transfer the isa from there to here? Is ad sheyida bedavar hanoder? It says kiyida neder has to be until you actually compare it to a davar hanoder, something which was permitted that you've turned into isa, and now you're transferring that over to this other piece of meat here. Therefore, that automatically negates the case of a bchor. You didn't do anything; it's automatic. The animal's born; it's a bchor. So that would be considered davar asur. But the man the asur amar, the man the amar, the asur, the one who says no, that's a valid neder because amar kra. It says in the very pasuk that we learn out the whole concept of of a neder. It says there, ish ki yider neder lahashem. What's the word lahashem coming to add? It's coming to tell you that in certain exceptions, even though it's like an Isus LaHashem, the neder is valid. Which one? Abchar. La Hashem le rabbis davar asr, to tell you that in certain instances, even something which was that wasn't didn't become asr because you verbalize it, but because it is asr, nevertheless, if you compare something else to it, it'll be a valid neder, like abchar. And we'll soon see why abchar. Uman de shari la Hashem, the one who says that what he dismisses abchar is another asr, and therefore, if you make a neder comparing to it, nothing. Who says that? What does he do with Hashem? He needs it. If you say that this piece of meat should be like a carbon chatas. Now, a carbon chatas, we know we spoke before about a shlamim, that's a voluntary carbon, a toida is a voluntary carbon, an oil is a voluntary carbon. A chatas and Hashem is not a voluntary carbon. If you didn't have it, you have to bring a chatas Hashem. In fact, you have a rule, Mamashkin, we force you to bring your chatas and Hashem. So how do we treat the chatas Hashem? Do we say that that's called a davar hanodur because I have to take the animal and consecrate it, or do we say it's a davar asik because you have no choice? You're compelled to set aside an animal. So therefore, we're saying it that the pasuk Hashem is telling you that if you're comparing a piece of meat to a chatas and Hashem, it's a valid neder. So we have an inclusion and we have an exception. So this opinion says we include chatas v'Hashem, but we exclude abchar. Abchar is considered davar asik. So the matter is, why do you decide that a chatas v'Hashem is considered a davar hanodur? And to include in Hashem, and a kachar is excluded. The rabbis chadas v'Hashem, maybe the other way around. So Gemara explains. You know why chatas v'Hashem lends itself more to a davar another? Because at the end of the day, you have a whole bunch of flock. You have a big flock there. You have a bunch of animals, cattle, and you choose which animal you're going to use. So therefore, that's like a davar another. By saying b'chayr, you don't do any choosing. By b'chayr, it's the firstborn. What did you have to do with it? Nothing. So therefore, b'chayr is more likely to be compared to a davar asr, and a chatzas ashram is more likely to be compared to a davar hanodur. So umaitzid is b'chayr, shu kaddish me'ima. B'chayr is different, is born, naturally born, the firstborn. Umand asa b'chayr, the one who says that if you make a ned, I want to compare the b'chayr is considered davar hanodur. What's his logic? He says, also there's input from you on your side. And therefore I say that a b'chor is like a davar another. What input do you have? The time we learn. How do we know that if you had a firstborn in your house, it's incumbent upon you to actually say the words that this b'chor should become kodesh l'Hashem. It says the pasuk, the male taktish, you should go ahead and sanctify it to the Eibishter. So therefore, there is an input from you, and because it's an input from you, that's like a davar another, and that's why I believe is a b'chor davar another. Nu man shari, that's a strong proof. The one who says that it's not considered davar another, b'chor davar asur. What's the equal in the pasuk that you have to make a kodesh? Ki lo magish le mila matish. It's just it's a nice thing to do, but if you don't make it, it's not kodesh. It's kodesh automatically anyway. Maybe so. No, what they're really arguing is, are you adding any more kedusha by saying it kodesh? This Tana holds no. You're not adding any more kedusha, but the Torah wants you to say the words to do. I guess to be involved in the mitzvah. And the other opinion says no. When you say kodesh, you're actually adding another layer of kedusha. So there's a davar another, some input from you on your behalf, and therefore by b'chayr we compare it to a b'chayr. Let's just go to the Mishnah already. Ki imra kedidim. So we have the Mishnah. Even though at the end we learned that the entire Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda adds that if you don't have a chaf, if you don't say it like this, it's nothing. But the Tanakama, before we had Rabbi Yehuda, or there is a view out there, a mayor who holds, even if you don't say like an animal, like the mizbeach, just say the food I eat by using mizbeach, that's considered really a valid neder. So we look at the Braisa as follows. It says the Braisa, Imra, if you said the word Imra, or if you said the word Le Imra, or if you said, so we finished Ram Chama, we did not resolve it at all. And there's machlekes is showing him how we paskin. and I guess along the lines of the Darim, Stam the Darim Machmed, so many of the Rishonim hold that Machmed, that it should be, we go after be Korah, we look at the beginning, the difference of Al Neder. Okay, we look at the Braisa, Imra, if you say Imra, if you say Le Imra, if you say Ke Imra, or you said Didim, La Didim, or Kadidim, so you see that even if you don't say a Chaf, just Didim, Imra, according to this view, Eitzim, La Eitzim, Ke Eitzim, Ishim, Le Ishim, Ke Ishim. We'll see later if it's La or Le. Mizbech, Le Mizbech, Kamizbech, Heichel, Le Heichel, Ke Heichel. So we're giving examples here where you omitted the Chaf and still it's just as good. Yerushalayim, Le Yerushalayim, Ke Yerushalayim. Kulan, now Yerushalayim, Rabbi Yehuda clearly says is no good. You need Ke Yerushalayim. So obviously this is an opinion that argues Rabbi Yehuda, which is Rameir. So he said, cool on all of these cases. If you say that if I eat by you, it's like Yerushalayim, is Yerushalayim awesome. In other words, I don't care about the chaf, it's awesome. But if I say loy oichalach, if I say I will not eat by you, in other words, what I won't eat by you is like Yerushalayim. So what I will eat by you is not like Yerushalayim. And of course, what am I saying? What I will eat by you is permitted. So in all these cases, mutter is permitted. Now, man shamin le, who is this opinion? The loishani le, he makes no difference whether you have a chaf or you don't have a chaf. It's definitely not Rabbi Yehuda. Imra le imra ke imra. Who is that? The Meir. So therefore, it's Rameir. And we have a problem. Because we learned yesterday, Rameir said that if you say, let's say, le carbon, loy oichalach, we break it up into two halves. We say, le carbon is a carbon, and we add the preposition, and therefore, loy oichalach, I won't eat by you, and therefore, it's a valid neder. And here we just said, you said, Lidushalayim, Kiddushalayim, and you said that loy oichalach is permitted. Now, why? True, it's permitted because we look at it as an inference. But if you look at it, if it's Rameir says, when you conclude loy oichalach, it's not an inference, it's an explanation. It's lit carbon, let's say, loy oichalach, therefore I won't eat by you. So how can this be Rameir? Hey, Masayf, it says the cool on all of these cases, if I say loy oichalach, I won't eat by you, mutter permitted. But didn't we learn yesterday, lit carbon, loy oichalach, if I say to a carbon, and therefore I won't eat by you. Why? It's treated as if lit carbon, all the food in your house to me is like a carbon, and therefore, so how can this be the mayor? Like kasha, there's no question. La imra, or some say lo imra, had amar le imra. If he said le, like in the case of carbon, if he said le carbon, then we touch le carbon. He's saying openly, this is a carbon, and then you say lo oichalach, so we're going to say therefore lo oichalach, I won't eat by you. But if you say la carbon, it is not a carbon. You can't say it's not a carbon, and therefore I won't eat by you. If it's not a carbon, then I won't eat by you. So obviously, what I'm saying is it's not a carbon. What I won't eat by you, but what I will eat by you is a carbon. Oh, that is like a double negative. That's by implication, and Rameir holds we don't do implications. So that is the difference. When you see a lam, you have to know whether it's a li or whether it's a la. Okay, that ends today's Gemara, and we'll continue tomorrow in Mitzvah Hashem.